Are you ready? Okay, I'm going to say hi and get us started. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Pastor Ben Sloss. I am the associate pastor here at Grace Lutheran Church, and I'm a proud member of our Peace in Palestine LaGrange team that helped to put this event on and bring our wonderful speaker, Munther here, to tell us a little bit about what he's doing. We're so happy to have Pastor Munther here. Pastor Munther is a pastor, as you can imagine, in Bethlehem at Christmas Lutheran Church. Maybe some of you have seen, especially around Christmas time, there is a very well-viewed simulcast between our National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. and Christmas Lutheran Church in Bethlehem, and that it goes right into his backyard, right into their sanctuary. You get a little view into Bethlehem, and we're going to take another view into Bethlehem tonight and to look and see what it's like for the Palestinian people who are living there. And so we're so happy to have Pastor Munther here to talk about that. He is, in addition to being the pastor at Christmas Lutheran, the academic dean at Bethlehem Bible. Is it college or university? College. And he's also the director of the Christ at the Checkpoint conferences, which if you have not heard about them, please do check them out. They are an amazing thing to see, all of these amazing speakers and really talking about powerful theology in the presence of walls and checkpoints and all of these things that seem to stand against everything that Jesus said. And so that's powerful as well. He's also a board member of Kairos Palestine and spends a lot of his time speaking both locally and internationally on issues related to the theology of the land, the Holy Land, on Palestinian Christians and Palestinian theology. He is a well-written author. Please do Google him, check out some of his books. They're fantastic. He got his master's in biblical study from Westminster Theological Seminary and has a PhD from Oxford and has a wonderful wife and 2 children as well. So we're very happy. Please help me and welcome Munther Isaac.
So good evening. Is this on?
I think so. I'll turn you up a little bit.
Okay. So good to be here, and thank you for coming and being with us. And thanks for the introduction. And as you heard, I come from Palestine, from Bethlehem. That's where I am from. Originally, I'm from a little town called Beit Sahur, next to Bethlehem. I grew up there all of my life, and as you heard right now, I serve as a pastor there, and I teach also biblical studies. And I am here on a small time in the United States visiting some of our Lutheran partner churches and also speaking in a conference. And I'm so grateful for the invitation and the opportunity to speak briefly from my forthcoming book, The Other Side of the Wall, on a Palestinian Christian testimony and perspective and the way we read the Bible from the other side of the wall, walls that have been constructed not just, as I will argue, physically, but have always been there in the minds and theology and activity of many Christians around the world. And to begin with, I think sometimes many people are even surprised to know that we exist as Palestinian Christians. I studied in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. Whenever I said I come from Bethlehem, people simply assumed Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And I had to explain that I came actually from the real Bethlehem in Palestine. It should be a surprise if we did not exist, because Christianity started in Palestine, right? And even Arab Christianity itself is not a new phenomenon. In fact, Arab Christianity is even older than Islam. There has always been Arab theology, Arab engagement, an Arab church. Our history in Palestine as a Christian community is part of the history of the Palestinian people in general, and that history can be described as a history of living under occupation for all of our lives. The people of Palestine never ruled themselves. From biblical times until today, we have always been occupied and ruled by other empires. And that kind of even shapes our identity and the way we even understand things around us. And as a result of this long history of occupations, if you wish, you know, if you look at all of that, and today we still live under occupation, our numbers as a Christian community is sadly in decline. And today we number around, in historical Palestine, or if you wish, Palestine and Israel, we number around 180,000 Palestinian Christians. On one side of the divide, we live among a majority of Jews in the state of Israel. Sometimes even people don't know that more than 10%, 12% of the population of Israel are actually Palestinians, even though they are treated as second-class citizens in their homeland. Israel defines itself as a Jewish state, passed a law that says the right for national self-determination is exclusive to the Jewish people only. Can you imagine such a law if it's passed, for example, here? How the uproar that will take. But that's how Israel defines itself. And so the Palestinians find themselves there as second-class citizens in their own homeland, the place where they have been living there for hundreds of years, if not more than that, thousands of years. Now, among them, of course, when I say 12%, a small minority are Christians. Of course, the majority are Muslims, among a bigger majority of Jews. And on the other side of the wall, the Palestinian side, if you wish, in the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza, there is around 45,000 Palestinian Christians living with our Muslim neighbors. A small percentage, 1% versus 99%. So a number and a percentage and a community that is in constant decline because of all the challenges that we have been through. And as a community today, we face so many challenges on the other side of the wall, if you wish. As a community today, as part of the Palestinian people, the biggest challenge by far is life under the Israeli occupation. That is the biggest challenge that faces all Palestinians, but as a smaller community within the Palestinian people, we are influenced as well by the Israeli occupation and everything that comes with the occupation, the economical difficulties. And I'm not sure, this is the quote I mentioned about Netanyahu's words, Israel is a state only for the Jewish people. And the right to exercise, that's the law actually. The right to exercise national self-determination in the state of Israel is unique to the Jewish people only. And in our side, this is our reality. And I'm not sure many of you have been to Palestine. You have seen the wall. Yet sadly, even many times, even pilgrims don't understand the reality because you're just visiting holy sites. But this is the map of the West Bank. And remember that the West Bank is a very small area. I've heard that it's almost as the size of Delaware, this small area, even a little bit smaller. And what you see here in the wall is the red and the purple. It's a separation wall, which is mainly built on Palestinian land occupied in 1967. The blue dots that you see are the Israeli settlements and military Jewish colonies or settlements or military bases, which are scattered all over the West Bank. And I'm not sure you understand what a settlement is. A settlement is a Jewish-only city or town. Not only we cannot live there, we can only access there for labor, and many times these settlements are connected by a system of road, which we cannot access as well. The result is that the small area is fragmented, and you always have to avoid checkpoints, you always have to avoid the settlements. So for Bethlehem, which is here, from one side it's surrounded by the wall. And remember, the vast majority of Palestinians, more than 95, cannot cross the wall. We cannot go to the other side. We cannot go to the Israeli side. And even going to another Palestinian city, like Hebron, we have to go through checkpoints. Leaving Bethlehem to go to Ramallah, we have to avoid the wall and the settlements. Leaving Bethlehem we go through a checkpoint. Entering Ramallah, we also go through a checkpoint. These daily restrictions and delays are part of our daily lives. And these things are not reported in the news, but this is what the occupation does. In reality, the Israeli occupation controls every aspect of our lives as Palestinians. Yes, we have a Palestinian government or a Palestinian Authority, but it's very limited in what it can do because Israel controls everything from borders to water, to electricity, to even underground air. Everything is controlled by Israel, even who comes in and who comes out, residency, and so on. As a result, these become our daily terminologies, daily language, vocabulary, occupation, settlements, checkpoints, land confiscations, and inequality. And when I say land confiscations, because the settlements and the separation war are mainly built on Palestinian land. And when I say Palestinian land, I don't mean disputed land, as if it's somewhere in the middle and we say this is ours, they say this is theirs. No, it's land owned by families for generations, land farmed by families for generations, and that is lost. And in many cases, land owned by Christian families. This is the Crimson Valley near Bethlehem. More than 40 Palestinian Christian families lost huge amounts of land when Israel built the wall, even though they had papers to prove their ownership of the land for centuries. They were very amazing in their resilience. They held a weekly mass there for a few years on every Friday to try to raise awareness and to pray that they are able to keep the land. But sadly, that community lost that land. Water is another issue. And I use the water example because it's basically a humanitarian matter and has nothing to do with security, because Israel always loves to blame everything on security. On average, an Israeli person uses 4 to 5 times more water than a Palestinian. Most of the water is actually in the West Bank underground, but we're not allowed to dig for water. And Israel controls the water, takes it and sells it back to us. But on a, this is, as I said, the ratio. Sometimes we have days in Bethlehem where we don't have running water for up to 20 days in our homes. And to survive, we store water in water tanks and use it economically. But we have to look from windows and see the Jewish settlements where they have swimming pools and green areas. And you simply ask, is this fair? And again, this is not a matter of Israeli security. Similarly, I can talk about the inequality of the immigration and residency areas. We have many millions of Palestinians who became refugees who are not allowed to return to their homes. We have many Palestinians also who were forced to leave in 1967 or were even just outside to study and were not allowed to come back to the West Bank when Israel occupied it in 1967. And even more recently, Israel is denying foreigners the visa if they are married to Palestinians. We're talking about around 20,000 Palestinians who are married to foreigners, and they cannot even bring their spouses to live with them. And we're seeing them leaving one family after the other. And in the last 2 years, I've lost 2 friends, one family from our church, because the man is married to a Bolivian, and she was not granted visa to come because Israel again controls the border. Even to bring it to this, more at home to you, we have another Palestinian woman married to an American pastor, and he was denied entry at the airport because he's married to a Palestinian. Yet all of that is happening while any Jewish person around the world can claim our land as their homeland, immigrate, and have more rights than the people who have been living in this land for a long time. And you wonder, is this fair? Where is the fairness in this? This is what the conflict is about. And you have to understand these things. You have to understand, in addition to that, the big difference between the two sides of the wall in terms, for example, of the economy. And I think this number really explains the situation more than anything else. The gross domestic product in Israel in 2017, according to the World Bank, of course, is around 38,000. Yet for Palestinians, it's less than $3,000. And you don't have to be a genius to figure out that this is not a formula for coexistence. And it's figures like this and the examples I mentioned about the water and other issues that are the real cause of the problem. That's what the conflict is about. And let me be very clear, if we only blame, and this is what many people do, if we blame the violence of Palestinians on Islamic fundamentalism, actually we become part of the problem, because we're not understanding, we're not taking into account the real cause of the issue, which is the occupation, and that is the real problem that we have in Palestine. So this is the big challenge, as I said, for us as a Christian community, as part of the Palestinian people. But there are some challenges that are unique to the church, and I'll speak about them now, in terms of being right now a small minority. For years, we've existed with our Muslim neighbors in very good relations. I didn't do anything. Shall I?
Yeah, I want to get it clipped in all the way.
Okay, maybe that's the problem.
If you slide it right there on the outside.
Thank you. I apologize. For years, we've had, you could say, a good relationship with our Muslim neighbors, Palestinian Christians and Muslim. We even don't like the word minority as Palestinian Christians, because we are Palestinians, Arabs, same culture, same heritage, same traditions, and in general, very good neighborly relationships. But things are slowly changing, and that's something to be concerned about, in that many Palestinian Christians are a bit concerned about what is perceived as the Islamization of the Arab society in general. The rise of the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, the rise of Hamas in Gaza, caused many young Palestinian Christians to a little bit withdraw from the society and feel a bit detached from our society, and not have more friendships as things used in the past, out of maybe suspicion and fear. It's not that we are attacked, for example, by our Muslim neighbors, because we're not. It's not like we are threatened, but it's like we're beginning to see these walls as if between in our society being constructed, and it is something that is really serious. And you sense this because right now our numbers are small. Even in, for example, in one of our Lutheran schools we have in Bethlehem, in some of the lower classes, we have 2 or 3 Christians among 35 Muslims. And this creates feelings of insecurity even within a Christian school. And this is something that we're beginning to address as religious leaders, Muslims and Christians, and trying to build more awareness of the need to continue to build relationships. This is actually, all of these are kind of new developments. And when I mention, in the past that there were friendships, even in my lifetime, when I was in university and I studied first in Palestine civil engineering, most of my friends were Muslims, and they actually used to like to come to church and listen to our choir music. My landlord from the Ramallah area, a Muslim and who's still a Muslim, was baptized as a child in the Orthodox Church because of the friendship his father had with the Orthodox priest. And his father thought, why not get the blessings of Christians in addition to being a Muslim, because in his thinking we worship the same God, and 2 is better than 1, that kind of mentality. It's a typical Palestinian village mentality, but these things are not happening anymore. And this is my point in terms of some walls as if being created in the Palestinian society. and this development of the minority complex. Really, the big questions many people are asking is which version of Islam will prevail, the Islamic State one or the one we're accustomed with in Palestine and in the Middle East, in which we coexisted well with one another. But as a community within the Palestinian society, we are still, despite everything, despite our numbers, despite the immigration, we're still thriving in what we're doing. We are an integral part of our society. We are anything but a silent minority in the corner feeling sorry for ourselves. We're involved in education, in healthcare, in culture, even in the political life. And we need to give even credit here to not just to the church, but to the Palestinian Authority, who is really doing its best to make sure that Palestinian Christians are contributing. By numbers, 1/3 of healthcare centers in the West Bank are Christians. So you see that, we might be 1% in the West Bank, but we're contributing to more than our numbers or percentage would suggest. 45% of all non-governmental organizations are church-related or funded organizations involved in charity and in development. And right now we have 10 Palestinian Christian mayors, and this is as part of the quota system by the Palestinian Authority. So by law, the mayor of Bethlehem has to be a Christian, and by law, where Christians make probably 25% in Bethlehem. The mayor of Ramallah, by law, has to be a Christian, and in Ramallah, Christians are less than 5%. So this speaks about the kind of style of leadership that the Palestinian Authority tries to execute. We right now have a government, and regardless of what we think or what I think of that government and how it was formed and why it was formed and all of that, and regardless of the fact that we have a ridiculous number of ministers, 22, we don't have a state yet, 4 out of the 22 are Christians right now, and these are chosen or appointed. This includes the Minister of Finance, who actually is responsible for the budget of the Palestinian Authority, and the Minister of Health, and responsible of the hospitals. And so we are really influential in key positions, not just as a church, but as individuals and leaders in our society. And of course, as a theologian myself, and I'm not hiding my bias, I think that one of our most important contributions is our theology as Palestinian Christians. We have been writing about the situation, about life in general. Our theology is deeply rooted in our reality. We ask and write about justice, about nonviolence, about the occupation, about the Nakba or the catastrophe. I'll speak more about the Nakba in a minute. I remember that even as a child, as a teenager, the things we debated in church included questions whether throwing rocks at the Israeli soldiers is nonviolent or violent resistance. And these are, so we don't write theology in libraries, but we write it in checkpoints. And you've heard that I lead a movement called Christ at the Checkpoint, which seeks to have a conversation between our theology, our faith, and our reality, with our faith being symbolized by Christ and our reality being symbolized by the Checkpoint. And we've been holding conversations and conferences and writing books on this issue. And I strongly encourage you to, if you have not done that yet, to read something by a Palestinian Christian, and I'll be more than happy to recommend to you several books on this topic. If you read anything by a Palestinian Christian, you will immediately sense that we are writing from out of pain and hurt, not just because of the situation itself, not just because of the occupation itself, but also from the because of the position and actions of our sisters and brothers around the world, which have, in a sense, caused us this pain. Even it would not be a stretch to say that the position and actions of the church in the West is threatening our existence as a church in the East, and I'll speak more about this in a minute. And why I say that? Let us remember what happened in 1948, so that you understand our reality. When Israel was created in 1948, for Israel to become a state, something had to give. Israel was not created on an empty land. Instead, by numbers, in 1948, 500 Palestinian towns and villages, you see them in these black dots, were completely destroyed or evacuated. And creating the mass problem of, back then, 800,000 refugees. Today, they number more than 5 million. And if you speak to any refugee today, they wouldn't just say we are refugees from Palestine. They would tell you the name of the town or village they came from, even though that town might not exist anymore, but it exists in our conscience and in our memory. In addition to the thousands killed, and in addition to the fact that we have lost 78% of our historical land, which is what you see in the yellow, where Israel was created in 1948. This was a national catastrophe. In Arabic, the word is Nakba. If you wish, a catastrophe with biblical proportions. Yet when this happened, Israel was created around Christian circles as a divine intervention, as a miracle from God. This is how Christians spoke about Israel, as a divine act. And over the years, I've gathered and studied the way in which Christians speak about the state of Israel. And here are some examples that have come from either books or conversations or official documents. It's common among many Christians to say, for example, that the Abrahamic covenant continues with the Jewish people today and by association with the state of Israel. Try to think of this statement as a Palestinian. What is this statement telling me as a Palestinian? Try to think for a moment what such a statement is saying to us about the other side, about our enemies, if you wish, about us, and is God against us now? You have to begin to wonder based on this theology. Other statements include, and this is from official documents in many churches, that the creation of Israel in 1948 is a sign of God's faithfulness, is a fulfillment of prophecy, or a sign of God's faithfulness to the Jewish people. Again, think for a moment how a Palestinian would respond to such statements. Because if the Nakba, the catastrophe in 1948, is a sign to God's faithfulness to the Jewish people, then it's what exactly to the Palestinians? It's a sign of God's judgment to the Palestinians. You see, you have to begin one. And again, all of a sudden we begin to think about the God of love and mercy that we know in the Gospels, and we compare that to this message of God, and you think, where is God for us in these messages? And the problem, as I will explain in these statements, is that they completely ignore or exclude the Palestinian reality. They are written as if, or Christians think as if the land was empty, as if Israel was created on an empty land. But in other places, it becomes even more aggressive, if you wish. How many of you heard that slogan? If you bless Israel, God will bless you. And if you stand against Israel, God will curse you. Have you heard this before? And it's a very common phrase repeated in many, many evangelical circles, even here. What's really amazing about this phrase is that the motivation behind supporting Israel here becomes that you want to get God's blessing, or even to avoid God's curse on you. So it's not really rooted in love for the Jewish people necessarily, but trying to be on the right side, if you wish. And to me, this verse, by the way, is speaking about Abraham and God using him and to bless the nations. And if you read Paul in the New Testament, he reads this promise as a promise that was fulfilled in Christ. However, today, this is used, and let's be honest, to manipulate people, for political support using religion. We have as if to support Israel. And of course, many people simply assume that it is a truth that cannot be debated, that God gave the land to the Jewish people as an eternal possession, so Jews have a divine right to the land today. And before debating this land, this statement and what it means, what is the statement telling me as a Palestinian? I hope you begin to see the issue here. And then on the other hand, does the Bible really say that? By the way, do you know that in the Bible, the promised land is actually from the river of the Nile to the river of the Euphrates? That's what God promised Abraham. In other words, if you are really using the Bible and want to be consistent in your reading, then Israel today must occupy Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Egypt, or just don't use the Bible because that's the promised land. How is Israel defined in the Bible? Did God promise the land as a possession or as an inheritance? And what's the difference? There is a big difference between the two, because in the Bible we possess nothing. Everything belongs to God. Nobody can claim this is mine. The people of God in the Bible, are they defined as an ethnicity, or is it a matter of faith? And how did the New Testament read these promises? You see, it's not that simple. That's my point. Nevertheless, these statements are taken as truth and then translated into a political support to the state of Israel on the one side, and then even against the Palestinians and even against Palestinian Christians on the other hand. It's well documented today that Christian Zionism as a movement, Christians who support Israel, is involved in strong political lobbying in this country and around the world, and heavily funds Israeli settlements that are illegal to the international law. Just think of that logic. And we're not talking about millions of dollars that come from churches to these settlements projects. We're talking about billions over the years. Billions of dollars coming from American churches, not for schools or hospitals or peace initiatives, not for the work of the church, but to support Israel, its military and settlements. And you think as Palestinians, when we hear this, it makes us really angry over these issues. This is a position that is by no means a minor or a minority position. Among American pastors, 80% agree to the statements that Christians should support Israel. And today it's common to read headlines. These are all from Israeli newspapers, how U.S. Christian charities bankroll Israeli settlements and so on. In addition, this movement today has become mainstream and have access, as you all know, to the White House and became very influential. Were very influential in the decision to move the Israeli embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem under a lot of evangelical support in the United States. And in this movement, we as Palestinian Christians, we are ignored at best as part of the Palestinian people and dehumanized at worst. And how do I say that? Think of slogans like "a land without people for a people without a land." That is the slogan of the Zionist movement, which Christians have used before and in support of the Zionist movement. And of course, what's the problem with this slogan? The problem that the land had people. And I used to think, did they know that the land had people? When it comes to the British Empire, they knew too well that the land had people because they occupied us, yet still spoke about our land as a land without a people. The reason being is that they were not talking in a literal way, but in terms of people of equal worth. to them and their thinking and to the incoming settlers. You see, the land had people, but it's perfectly fine to make them give away half of their land for the new Jewish immigrants. That's a typical colonial mentality, and dare I say, a typical colonial Christian mentality. Yes, the land had people, but they can move. We can decide their fate because we can and because we're entitled. And that mentality, which we see it in the very beginning of the Zionist movement, which Christians supported, continues even today. And this example from an article in a well-known website and magazine here in the United States called Christianity Today illustrates the issue. This was a debate in 2012 between two American evangelical leaders, and the discussion was, do Jews have a divine right to Israel's land? So it was a conversation. And again, try to put yourself in my shoe as you read this debate and think, how would I react to such a question? And when you read it, first of all, the first thing that comes to mind, what are they really debating? Because they have already called it Israel's land, right? So what's the debate? I don't know. Second, notice the language of divine right, right? Because if the answer is yes, Jews have a divine right to the land, then what can I say as a Palestinian? Can I say no? If I say no, I would be saying no to who? I would be saying no to God, right? So look at the awkward situation they put us in. It's an impossible situation. And the irony is that Christians go crazy when Muslims use this language, but we have no problem applying the same language to Israel. You see the logic here. But really my biggest problem with this whole debate is who's asking the question. Because what about the people of the land? Does our perspective matter? And what you have here, a classical case of two American theologians sitting at the comfort of their offices, discussing our land as if it's empty. What they say is theology, is the right doctrine, and we have to accept it. If I say as a Palestinian anything, it's a Palestinian perspective. It's nice, but it's not the right theology. And to illustrate my point even stronger, I actually emailed them back then and I said, can I respond? And I thought I had a good case why I should be included in the discussion. First of all, I live in this land, so I should be part of the discussion. Second, like the two, I am a Christian evangelical. And third, I was at the time doing my PhD in Oxford on this topic, so I thought I have credentials to be included in the conversation. Believe it or not, after an exchange of emails, they actually said, no, we don't want you to be part of this. This is what it is. That's what they was, an American discussion. Again, if I say anything, it's just that, a Palestinian perspective. And that is really the problem. To me, that is the original wall that has long existed and continue to exist among many Christians, because we are invisible in theology books, in the language of the church. We are invisible in the myth of Jews returning to an empty land, and I even put returning in brackets because using the word returning assumes it's their land to begin with, and we were for 2,000 years living on someone else's land because apparently we didn't get the memo. You get the problem here. Again, it's the romantic view of Israel being created again without any regard to the Palestinians who lived there for years. To me, this is the original wall. And again, if you look at the behavior of the church today, and I can talk about the pilgrims who come to visit the Holy Land, and the vast majority of them, the vast majority of pilgrims who visit the Holy Land spend at best 2 hours in Bethlehem. There is a wall that shields everyone, that shields us as Palestinians from, again, you visit the Holy Land, you enjoy Jerusalem, Galilee, as if there are no Palestinians. So this idea that we are invisible, not just in books, in theology, in thinking, in the pilgrims, and the dangerous mentality of the wall is that walls create perceptions. Once you decide that we cannot get along with one another, and you construct these walls, you begin then creating stereotypes of the other, perceptions of the other as to be feared, as to be rejected. That's when you dehumanize them, demonize them, and then in the end you justify even violence against people on the other side of the wall. Even sometimes you justify that violence by saying, well, they deserve it, they brought it upon themselves. And this is really the problem with the wall mentality. The wall, as I said, not just I'm talking about the physical wall we have in Bethlehem, but the wall that has always existed. Walls of separation that cause others to dehumanize us as Palestinians. And to me, one quote, shows that mentality of dehumanizing the other. This is Mike Pence speaking in the Israeli Knesset last year. And notice in his words, how are the Palestinians described? He said, we stand with Israel because your cause is our cause. Your values are our values. And your fight is our fight. We stand with Israel because we believe in right over wrong, in good over evil, and in liberty over tyranny. See, that's what walls do, and that's that mentality. From a self-righteous approach, you believe that you are the righteous, the right, the ones who believe in liberty, over against the Palestinians who are the evil, the wrong, and the tyrant. When I read this, I wonder, he speaks about liberty. Do we qualify for that liberty? That's all we want, liberty. It apparently, you see the problem here. And this is exactly where, this is the heart of the matter. You think, okay, and I've heard this many times, well, maybe it is that with, maybe he means the Muslims, but we wish all Palestinians were Christians, that there wouldn't be a problem. Many times I hear this. But in reality, even us as a church have not escaped this mentality. I told you I read Christ at the Checkpoint, and Christ at the Checkpoint, because we dare to challenge that perspective of the dominant and of the empire, if you wish, we have been attacked and labeled and demonized, even as Christians, by Christians, simply because we have a different political and theological perspective. We have been called all sorts of things, from being liberal to anti-Semitic to promoting Islam, Christian Palestinianism. Some of these labels, and you need to understand that behind these labels is a problem in which we can no longer have conversations because the best thing to do about, if you want to avoid conversations, is label the other side, assassin their character, and then you don't have to engage in a dialogue. And that shuts all conversations by labeling the other side. We have been silenced as a Palestinian Christian community. Our leaders have been many times invited, then having their invitation withdrawn. It happened with me and many of my colleagues. There was once a Christian conference in a Lutheran seminary, and the title, I think, was a dialogue on the Holy Land, a dialogue, but there was no Palestinian in that dialogue in a seminary. The only Palestinian Christian who was invited, Mubarak Awad, had his invitation withdrawn a week from the conference, and they ended up having a conference without any Palestinian or Palestinian Christian voice, because none of us apparently were deemed worthy of being on the table in a discussion. See the mentality here. In fact, this happened to me in mission conferences. And this is the shocking part, because when once I asked them, why are they objecting my presence in a mission conference? Is it something I said? Thought maybe I said something controversial. They told me, oh, they don't know you. It is because you are a Palestinian. And think of that. That is a mission conference. We want to send missionaries everywhere, but not to Palestinians. We need to hear of God's work anywhere, but not from Palestinians. How can you understand that? And in fact, my invitation from a mission conference in the United States here last year was withdrawn precisely because of my nationality. in that, as I said, you have to wonder, why are we being silent? And again, I want to hit home this point that people want to avoid conversations. And from a self-righteous approach, we prefer to create a perception or to create an image of the conflict as a conflict between good and evil, with good being the Judeo-Christian tradition, which is probably a code for cultural superiority, versus Islam, evil side, as if. And if we say this, then this means we don't have to have conversations, and it's safer. It gives us this self-righteous approach. The problem here is that we come as Palestinians, and we say we are Palestinians, but we're not Muslims, we're Christians. And we insist that it's the occupation that's the problem. It's not a conflict between two religions, as if to say. It's not a religious conflict. Yes, religious extremism is a problem, but the core of the issue is the occupation. And because if we frame it like this, by the way, and I refuse to believe this lies that Muslims and Jews cannot live together. I refuse to live. We need to emphasize that. But it's much safer for many to draw this image of the conflict and characterize the other in a negative way. And we continue to challenge that. And I think this is a big reason many times why we are being silent as a Palestinian Christian community. Despite that, we will continue to speak. We continue to challenge these Western Christian attitudes towards our land and our conflict. We continue to challenge Christian Zionism and simply say, even if you believe that God gave the land to the Jewish people, God bless your heart. But what do you propose we do as Palestinians? Live as second-class citizens? What about the occupation? What about the international law? What about human rights? And we continue to ask this question. And at the same time, and if we don't have time, but if you're interested, I can point you to many books that challenge that interpretation to begin with, from both a Hebrew scripture perspective and a New Testament perspective. And at the Bible College in particular, where I work, we've written a lot of theological books. And as I told you, my PhD was on this topic, answering the question, how do we understand the topic of the Promised Land in the Bible? And I hope that you get my point, because when we challenge the assumption that God gave the land to the Jewish people as an eternal possession, we're not saying that let's destroy Israel or get rid of all of the Jews, whether from our land or anywhere. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that let's deal with Israel based on the international law. Is this too much to ask? That's all we're asking. What we have a problem with is this whole language of divine right or fulfillment of prophecy or faithfulness of God, because we have seen that the moment you characterize Israel in a divine way, you can no longer criticize Israel, and Israel becomes above the law, and even justice is becomes, in a sense, relativized into this. So this is what you have a problem with, putting a special halo, if you wish, around the state of Israel and dealing with Israel in that manner. What we're saying is, let's deal with Israel based on the international law and hold Israel accountable when it breaks that law or when it treats Palestinian inhumanity and the occupation is the real issue that we have here at the moment. What we have a problem with is when either Christian leaders or, as in this case, the Israeli ambassador in the United Nations holding a Bible and defending Israel's right to build settlements. And this is that's what we have a big problem with. I want to quote what the Kairos Palestine document says. Therefore, we declare that any use of the Bible to legitimize or support political options and positions that are based upon injustice, imposed by one person on another or by one people on another, transform religion into human ideology, and strip the Word of God of its holiness, its universality, and its truth. We cannot continue to use the Bible in such a way, and that's Kairos Palestine, by the way, is an important Palestinian Christian document written a while ago. In conclusion, what is our message today as a Palestinian Christian community, and what is the message that we carry as churches and as leaders? To us, we call the church to take seriously the commandment of Jesus to be peacemakers. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." And I wonder, do we take him seriously enough when he said that? And the reason I ask, because sometimes I feel we get somehow the notion that blessed are the peacemakers means invite your neighbor for a cup of coffee and get along with them. I don't think that's what Jesus meant. And I think, remember, he said this in a very politically charged environment, in a time when people didn't get along, and he encouraged us to be peacemakers. And peacemaking, by the way, is never easy. There is a risk involved. Peacemakers is not simply to hold vigils for peace and pray for peace, because you need to listen to both sides. You need to engage with both sides. You need to listen. You need to step on the other side of the wall. You cannot simply characterize people and demonize them and expect that this is how peace happens. But not only that, and I emphasize here that peacemakers need to take stands for truth and justice. And I have to be honest, this is where I have many times problems with churches who say, let's pray that Palestinians and Israelis get along and tap on the shoulder and try to get us together. That's not the point. You need to take a stand for what is right and what is just. Peacemakers need to speak truth to power and say this is wrong, this is right, and not just simply try to be diplomatic. You know what I mean, diplomatic, or what I call them toothless Christians who try not to offend anybody and that end up not saying anything, because again, we don't want to hurt anybody's feeling. Peacemakers speak truth to power. And as we engage in peacemaking, let us remember there can be no peace without justice. Justice mattered to God in the Bible, and so it should matter to us. And to me, justice is the gauge by which we measure any theology. If our theology trumps the biblical ethical teachings of Jesus of love, equality, and justice, then we must rethink our theology. No matter what, if our theology produces discrimination or privileges or superiority, something wrong with that theology. We cannot continue using that language. Justice matters, and this is what the Bible spoke about. Justice and only justice. You shall follow, that you may live and inherit the land that the Lord your God is giving you. This applied in biblical times. This applies today. And this applied in the biblical land just as it applies here in this country today. Even in America, if you don't have justice in your communities, sorry to break it down for you, there is no future. There is no stability if you don't execute even in any society. The church cannot continue to be silent over the injustices that we see. And the church cannot simply say we give for charity, as if to make feel better about ourselves. Because challenging justice means challenging structures that cause injustice, and we have all a responsibility. And as we challenge justice, again, it's not enough to say what is wrong, but we need finally to create an image for a better future, for an alternative. And to me, the alternative to the injustice we have today, the alternative to the invitation, to the occupation, is a vision that we have of, as many of us in Palestine today, Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And I articulate it here in my Christian language as a vision of a shared land, sharing the land of Christ. That vision, sharing the land of God, that vision begins by emphasizing that every land belongs to God. And so our land, the land belongs to God. It doesn't belong to any nation or any religion or any ethnicity. Nobody can claim this is my land. Yet at the same time, we all belong to our lands. We all belong to God's land. You see, there's a big difference in the two. Beginning with saying that we all together belong to God's land is where we need to begin in our language and in our advocacy. And as such, we have to share the land. This is my conviction today. Sharing the land is so much different than dividing the land. When we divide lands, we build walls, and it's usually the stronger side who builds the wall, and the stronger side that determines where the wall is built. So we argue where the wall was built, and then after we build the wall, we stop engaging with one another, and we, as I said, dehumanize the other, and believe the lie that we cannot get along. And then fear and treat one another with suspicion, and somehow, foolishly, we believe this will create peace. I don't know how we believe that. And by the way, our land is too small to divide. We will be in each other's face. You cannot avoid that. So sharing is so much different than dividing. Sharing the land means that all the dwellers of the land share the land and its resources equally, and have the same rights, regardless of their ethnicity, or religion, or faith, or nationality. A shared land theology emphasizes that there are no second-class citizens in this land. No one should be marginalized or discriminated against in God's vision of the land. We have enough walls, and what we need is that mentality of sharing. And I want to quote again from the Kairos Palestine document, which builds a beautiful vision for the future. Through our love, we will overcome injustices and establish foundations for a new society, both for us and our opponents. Our future and their future are one. Either the cycle of violence that destroys both of us, or peace that will benefit both. Sharing the land has the conviction that we have one future together. And again, using Kairos, even though we have fought one another in the recent past and still struggle today, we are able to love and live together. We can organize our political life with all its complexity according to the logic of love and its power after ending the occupation and establishing justice. And so what we're saying right now is that it all begins with ending the occupation. And if there is a message that we want to bring today as a church, is that we need to put an end to the occupation. But ending the occupation cannot be our goal. It's only the first step towards living together. I say it in a more personal way. My dream and hope for this land, for my land, is that my children one day, or maybe grandchildren, will have Israeli friends. Not just simply to get rid of the occupation. But to do that, we need to begin by ending the occupation, and that is, to me, is the priority that we need to all. And after that, I'll leave it to the imagination of politicians. There has been many solutions that were suggested. We can create and find way or organize our political life as we see it. My question to our friends here, do we share this theology? As I said, the church has been part of the problem. And it's time for the church to become part of the solution. It begins with our theology. It also begins with the words, with the way in which we pray. Are we praying for that idea? And are we promoting it in our action, in our mission, and in our ministry? It's time that as a church we begin doing that. I believe we can make a difference if we are serious about things. We can make a difference. I no longer believe this idea that there will never be peace in Palestine until Jesus, even though when I used to hear this as a child, and I heard it many times, I used to love this quote because it made Jesus look like this superhero who flies in and rescues us, right? I no longer believe in this. I put it in a way that might sound a bit heretical. I no longer wait for divine intervention, because I believe that God has intervened in Christ. And I believe that because of that, He calls us to action. It's time that we change the way we look at the Holy Land. Rather than asking these, sorry to say, silly questions, do Jews have a divine right to Israel's land? That we begin asking, how can we advance peace between Israelis and Palestinians? I'm going to end with this quote about the divine intervention idea. This is Reverend Mitre Raheb. Christians need no longer wait for direct divine intervention, because the intervention has already taken place. The Messiah has come, and there is no need to wait for another. He said what needed to be said, and he did what needed to be done. God did his part. The ball is now in the court of humankind. The transformed faithful are to engage the world, challenge the monopoly of power, and live the life of an already liberated people. And it's those of us out of all people who have experienced the unconditional love of God, who have experienced God's justice and God's reconciliation among ourselves, that we can be advocates for this wonderful kingdom, this wonderful gospel-centered kingdom. If we take this seriously and begin taking our mandate to be peacemakers, hope creators in Christ more seriously. Thank you for listening, and I hope we can next have a good time of conversation. Thank you.
So we're going to take a quick break before we jump back in for some questions and answer time. There's restrooms just down the hall and some more food back there. But while we are breaking, we have a couple of announcements and some things that we can be doing. And so I'm going to ask Don Wagner, if you can. There you are. He's going to talk a little bit about HR 2407, No Way to Treat a Child, and there'll be a chance to help sign on to take some action today, too.
Well, thank you, Munther. This is a wonderful challenge to us as Christians, and thank you for the church of hosting them. One of the things we can do is to challenge our legislators. Usually we sit back and don't think there's anything that's being done, that we think Israel has total control, or we don't think we should be political as Christians. Well, I think Jesus, if you remember the parable of the unjust judge and the widow, remember that? What does the widow do? The widow wears down that judge, demanding for justice. She's rising up and challenging the judge. That's what we have to do with our Congress. And some of us are involved with a project that we've mentioned before. It's House Resolution 2407. And every day, Israel kidnaps, detains an average of 2 children under the age of 18. Puts them in prison. Sometimes they're under physical pressure, torture we'll call it, to get confession out of them. And then they have to sign a document in Hebrew which they don't read. My wife's nephew was one of those. They accused him of throwing a stone. He wasn't even involved. So there's a movement called No Way to Treat a Child, American Friends Service Committee, and now several denominations. I don't know if ELCA has passed this.
Yes.
They have. Thank God. The Presbyterians, United Church of Christ, is going on to the Episcopalians. So churches are now getting behind this. This is a way we can get active locally. So I'm going to pass around 2 clipboards, and if you would write your name very carefully. Last time we got some signatures, we couldn't read a lot of them to send you information. So just write carefully and legibly so that we get your, and if you don't know your district, which congressional district you're in, just put a question mark. A lot of us might be in Kairos district who refuse to respond to this. So we need to hammer away at him. My wife and I have met with him personally. He won't touch it. So if he hears from more of us in this election year, maybe we can make a difference. So if you'll just sign name, address, email, and write carefully. We got 2 of these going around during the questions. And then there's a webinar, and Jeff has made a number of copies. So should we just pass these around? There's a webinar October 1st at 7 p.m. where you can, it tells you how to sign up and get a lot more detail. I'm just rushing this by. So I'll just pass these around, and if you can do that, take one, okay? But this is a way for us to begin to respond as Christians to the occupation and the problems. Thank you very much. And again, great talk, Munther. Ben?
So if they need a break, or should we do the Q&A immediately, ask them. Yeah.
Wonderful presentation, Pastor. I'm John Wiley. Some of you know me. I'm with Abraham's Children, First Presbyterian Church of Wheaton. We've been working for peace and justice in the Holy Land for about 25 years. And I wanted to tell you a story about something that's going on right now that is certainly pertinent to what we just heard. We've been supplying medical equipment to faith-based hospitals and other institutions for several years through a group called Hospital Sisters Mission Outreach. They're in Springfield. They're a part of the Sisters of St. Francis. They collect used but serviceable medical equipment from all over the Midwest from hospitals. You know, the doctor always needs to have the latest version of whatever. So what happens with last year's model? Well, it may get dumped, it may get put in the warehouse. We free that, or they free it, and we get it to where it's needed. So we've had some fundraisers. We had one this year in May. The speaker was, I'm sure, a good friend of yours, Pastor Gary Burge. And we raised some money, and we had already sent some money to the sisters, and they put together 2 containers for us. One container was addressed to the St. Francis Elderly Home in Nazareth, Catholic institution, 45 patients, many on a waiting list. Beds are 25 years old, virtually have nothing to take care of these people, harassed by the Minister of Health all the time. Had 2 surprise inspections Christmas Day last year, one at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and then one in the afternoon. The other container was designated for Augusta Victoria Hospital. So why are Presbyterians worried about Lutheran hospitals? Well, Augusta Victoria is one of the leading hospitals in East Jerusalem supplying aid to the West Bank. So the containers left Springfield in March. They arrived in Haifa in April. And there they sit. We got one release 2 weeks ago to the elderly home. We're not sure how we got it released because they wanted, for the obstacles they put in front of us, they kept it there so long that they wanted $14,500 in storage fees before they would finally release it after it was finally approved. And we had to pull some real Houdini to get that one approved. And the elderly home now has it. But again, it got to Haifa in April, and this is September. The other container, it's probably worth about $150,000. Some of it's sophisticated equipment. Still sits in Haifa. Your pastor, Syed, former pastor, happened to be going over there when we learned we had a problem last month or in July, and he tried to intercede and thought that things were moving along. And in talking to the CEO of Augusta Victoria, we thought things were moving along also. Now we're not sure. We haven't gotten any information in the last week or so about the status of this container. And again, this is not bombs or machine guns, AK-47s, this is medical equipment. I would echo what Don Wagner said. I have started the drumbeat with my congresswoman and Senator Durbin. Duckworth is useless. She's drunk the Kool-Aid, thank you. And not much sense talking to her, but Durbin's another story. And so I would do that. But I wanted to tell you what's been going on. We've had a very anxious summer because of this. And there's no excuse for medical equipment to be held up the way it has been. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to give Ruth Nelson a chance to talk because she is leading a trip to the Holy Land in January. I'm going on it. I'm excited about it. But she is going to tell you a little more if that's something you might be interested in doing. It's a wonderful experience.
I'm Ruth Nelson from Bright Stars of Bethlehem. For those of you who aren't familiar, we are a multi-denominational Christian group that supports ministries in Bethlehem. It originated out of Christmas Lutheran Church. We have grade schools, high school, fine arts university, and programs for all ages throughout the West Bank. We lead trips to the Holy Land, and the trips are unique in that, yes, we all go to all the usual Holy Land sites, but we also show you the work of the church on the West Bank. And so if you're interested, there's some brochures on the table over here. I'd love to talk to you about it.
Highly recommend the work of Bright Stars.
So I think we are ready now. Munther has kindly offered to take a few questions. Yeah. Let me bring a microphone to you so everybody can hear too.
I'm just curious if you ever interact with the Orthodox Church and if you've ever interacted with Father Atallah, or whatever his name is.
Bishop Atallah Hanna. Yeah, he's a dear friend and a dear mentor and someone we respect highly. But he's almost like a lone voice, unfortunately, in the Orthodox Church, because it's a church caught in so many internal struggles, and they're not as vocal. Because now Israel is confiscating or cheating its way to steal some of its properties, the Orthodox Church, some of the settler movements at least, they're becoming, at least the Greek monks, more vocal. The Orthodox Church in Palestine is still controlled by the Greek hierarchy. So that's what I meant by that the Bishop Atallah Hanna is a nice, it seems sometimes even like a lone voice within his church, but he is a leading voice in the Palestinian society, very, very well respected ecumenically as well. And we work together a lot. I hear you.
You mentioned, Pastor, that the land is too small to divide. Are you talking about all the Holy Land of Israel, Palestine, or are you talking about Palestine itself? In which case, you're not an advocate of what's between. I misinterpret what you said.
I was vague on purpose, but now you forced me to. I meant the whole land, of course, not just the West Bank. And I meant that for different reasons. I am convinced of what I said. The land is too small to divide. And I'm convinced that walls cannot bring peace. And the mentality of separation can provide temporarily peace, but not a long-lasting peace. We have to accept one another. We have to share the land. Now, we might end up deciding that we want to have two states in it somehow that are mixed without borders, or a confederate or a binational government. And suggestions have been studied and proposed by academics, and models have been proposed. I see that my role as a church, as a church leader, is not to get into the small details of the solutions, but rather to create dreams, prophetic images in people's mind, and challenge as I said, the false conception that we cannot live together. So if people interpret that as promoting two-state or one-state, that's not what I mean. And on the other hand, I think that the two-state solution was unjust to begin with, 22% versus 78%, and asking Palestinians to get rid of thousands of years of our history. My wife's family come from Jaffa. and they still have their home. Why should we now accept that this is no longer ours? Why should we simply remove that part of our... So why not have a vision in which we all share everything, and we all have access to these places that we all cherish and care for deeply. So that's how I think about it. If, as I said, if we end up having a Palestinian state, and I'm a very I'm very patriotic Palestinian, and I am part of the first Intifada and the Palestinian national movement, so I'm not against that. I'm against the mentality that we cannot coexist together.
I just wanted to say that I generally form my experiences in life by experience. I don't learn by listening to what other people say or reading a book or whatever. And it sounds to me as though you're experiencing something that I've seen in many different situations through my experience. For one thing, I did take my family to Israel and Palestine during the year 2000. And we did have a taxi driver who couldn't get across the border because he was Palestinian. We had to be late for our plane, and they cheated us out of making us buy new tickets and everything like that. That was just an experience, and we were talking about Christianity there. I went to South Africa, and the same thing about hoarding water and dehumanizing the people that lived there for years and years because the white supremacy government wanted their land and their water. And then I say the same thing when I was a consultant to the Indian tribes. And they had been brought up in Christian churches and in Christian communities, but because they were Indian, because they lived on tribes, in tribal lands, their opinions didn't count and they weren't invited to participate. And then I saw the same thing with women in trying in any position of power whatsoever, that they are not invited or they're disinvited or the meeting gets moved at the last moment, and then their opinions aren't valued because they're the minority. Yeah. Or does a husband automatically get access to his wife's property when he marries her, because after all, she's just a woman and he has the power. So what I see happening over and over again in all these different situations I've experienced is that when people get an advantage that they don't want to give up, they try to rationalize why it is their divine right to have that advantage because they already have it. Yeah. If they didn't have it, it was given to them because they deserved it. And my nationality is Finnish. And the Finnish people are that's where people go to negotiate peace agreements, right? They believe it's unethical to try to convince someone else that they're wrong and you're right. What you do is you give them the facts and let them make up their own mind. And their national anthem says, I love my land, I have a beautiful land with skies of blue that I love with all my heart. But I have to realize that there are other people in other countries that love their land and have beautiful skies, and that we should all live in peace.
Thank you. Thank you. And just to comment just a little bit on the experience part, if I may. That's why it is imperative, I think, for churches, all of us here, that we demand, even we challenge the way we do pilgrimage. And that's why the 2 hours most pilgrimage spend in Bethlehem only, affirm the current person, because people don't come and sit with Palestinians and see, and we don't have many people doing what Bright Stars is doing, which is bringing pilgrims to stay in Bethlehem and Ramallah and meet Palestinian Christians and listening to stories and having those experiences. If you only visit and just spend 2 hours waiting online to visit the Nativity Church, that matrix have worked, and you haven't seen the occupation. And sadly, this is what's happening today.
Yes, my question is about Kairos Palestine document.
Yes.
Which is now all a bit old. And can you assess its impact inside and outside Palestine because document?
Yes. So I invite you to the next Kairos Palestine conference in December, because we are going to do just that. 10 years anniversary, we will examine the impact. Kairos Palestine, I think, did many good things and made a big impact, especially in the beginning. It brought Palestinian Christian voices together. So rather than everyone speaking alone. Now we have a unified voice, and it brought us together, and we still meet together, at least on a monthly basis with Bishop Atallah and with Reverend Mitri, and when Reverend Naeem was here, all of us are now meeting and coordinating, and that's a good thing. It forced many churches to respond, and that was a good thing. It made a big impact on the economical measures that many churches adopted resolutions to boycott from Israeli companies, to boycott Israeli companies that work in settlements. Many of these churches took these decisions as a direct response to Kairos. So there was a big impact, and it created also many theological discussions. Now, can we do things better? Yes, and we're always learning. You need to keep in mind that we are very, very limited in our resources, all of us, not just Kairos. Kairos is not an organization, it's a movement. So with what we have, I think we did really well. And in the next 10 years, Kairos' shift will be internal, giving Palestinians a message of hope and a message of belonging, that we need to stay in this land because we have a message, especially a message to Palestinian Christians. So we're working on an updated version if we have time. Hopefully in December we'll come up with something new.
We have time for just one or possibly two questions. Oh, Lori first, excuse me.
I wanted to find out if the friends circle that is or was very active for quite a while, the relations of the Jewish parents and the Palestinian parents that comfort one another, and are they working at all within Israel or Palestine to bring the people together, or even talking to the government at all?
I know of bereaved circles, but I haven't followed them recently. So I don't really know how that group is going, whether it's making an impact or not. And what I can tell you for a fact is that today there is a lot of withdrawal. And I say this as a statement without saying that's good or bad, because honestly, we don't know. By many Palestinians from these initiatives, because it doesn't do us any good if we just meet with Israelis, that's the argument, without challenging the occupation. So if the goal is not to challenge the occupation, even if there are Israelis who are well-intentioned, but they don't want to address the occupation, let's just meet as neighbors and try to get along. These initiatives are getting less and less today because of the frustration. I was for a long time, I took part in many Christian-Jewish dialogue and so on. And we go and we get along and we discuss things, and then we go back homes. I go through Jordan, they go through Tel Aviv, and I am stopped at checkpoints and they go. And so the structure didn't change. And these relationships continue to happen within an imbalance of power. And I don't think they can succeed, with all honesty. So I made a judgment. I said I would refrain from making, but you heard what I think. Yeah.
I'm wondering, because I kind of disagree with one thing you said.
Just one thing.
I don't know how your government works or how it works, but have you tried to involve yourself in the political process in any way? Because from my perspective, you will never get politicians to do anything that's just or reasonable that isn't within their interests. So I think it's a mistake to think you're going to rely on the Palestinians to not rely on the politicians to resolve the issue for Palestinians.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you would do that, but I think you definitely have to involve yourself in the political process. Would you agree with that? Or?
Yes, to a certain degree. So what I said is that I don't think the church should be involved in the business of writing the details of solutions. Does that mean we shouldn't involve in politics? No, what I'm saying is that I think we can actually make all the difference. I am convinced that change will not come from politicians. Change will come from grassroots movements, Christians, Muslims, and Jews who challenge the structures. And right now, this is So this is part of the message we need to spread, that we can get along and put pressures on their government. So what we do is actually very political and challenges structures of injustice. But when it comes to, I don't want us to become a theocracy or to impose our own solutions. So yes, I want us to be involved, but we are more effective if we create these dreams and embody them in our relationships and challenge the structures, rather than we are, with my, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, in political lobbying sometimes. I love what you're doing, but we need more people who are changing the pews before we go to challenge these politicians. That's what I mean. So we need to prepare the ground for peace.
Well, will you help me thank Pastor Munther for being with us this evening? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out. Thank you for being here. We hope you found this powerful and enjoyable. If you signed in and left an email, you'll hear more from us when things are coming up and when we can do more. But we appreciate your time here. If it'd be okay, could we close with a prayer? Let us pray. Almighty and gracious God, you are at work in this place. You are at work in Palestine. You are at work in Israel. You are at work around the world in all your children. Help us to see you at work. Help us to see what you are doing here and now. Help us to see what you are doing in the people and places we least expect you to be. Gracious God, bless all your people. Be with us this day as we wonder what may come next, as we work and fight and work as hard as we can for peace, for justice, for all. Help us to trust in you in the midst of this, O Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen.
As you leave, if you did not sign in, we would appreciate it if you'd leave your name and a way to contact you. We promise we will not barrage you with information, but we will let you know when we do other programs like this. So if you've not signed in, please do.